In order to evaluate or simplify this expression, the first step will be to simplify the exponent since there are no parentheses. And we do need to be careful when simplifying this. This is the opposite of 8 squared, which would be negative 64, not positive 64. And let's take a closer look at this. There's a big difference between the opposite of 8 squared and negative 8 squared. The opposite of positive 8 squared is the opposite of 8 times 8, which is equal to negative 64, which is what we have. But in the second case, we're actually squaring negative 8, which would be negative 8 times negative 8, which would be positive 64. So be very careful when simplifying expressions like this. Next, following the order of operations, we need to multiply and divide before we add and subtract. So the next step will be to determine this product here. So we'll have negative 64 plus 5 times 8 is equal to 40. And now we can determine this sum. Notice how we're determining a sum of integers that have different signs. So the first thing we should notice is the negative is going to outweigh the positive, so the sum is going to be negative. And then because the integers have different signs, to determine the sum we have to subtract their absolute values. Well, the absolute value of negative 64 is 64, and the absolute value of 40 is 40. So we'll subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value, so we'll have 64 minus 40, which would be 24, but we know the sum has to be negative, so the sum is actually negative 24. Now I always like to check to make sure this makes sense using the money analogy. We can think of negative 64 as a loss of $64, plus a positive 40 would be a gain of $40. Well, if we lose $64 and then gain $40, we're still down $24, so negative 24 makes sense.